Finding an affordable place to live in the United States can feel pretty impossible, whether you're a renter or a buyer. To begin with, there's a massive shortage of homes, and those who are able to find a home are spending a much bigger chunk of their paycheck than in recent years. So about a quarter of renters, some 12 million households, spend more than half of their income on housing, far in excess of the 1/3 level that's considered healthy. And high interest rates have exacerbated the problem for buyers, ballooning monthly mortgage payments. In fact, the very word mortgage is a Latin word composed of two smaller words, mort, meaning death, and gage, meaning pledge. So essentially, a mortgage is a death pledge, which somehow feels strangely appropriate, right? Well, what if I told you that there is a housing option out there that gives you both affordability and safety? And it offers housing that is often well below market rate with lifelong tenancy. No landlord, no mortgage, and serves first and foremost the people who live inside of that building. This is a Wohnungsbaugenossenschaften, a tongue twister for sure, as well as the German word for a housing cooperative. Think of them as the happy middle ground between renting and owning. The Beatles' John Lennon belonged to one. Madonna was rejected by one. So was former President Richard Nixon. But what are they exactly? And could they perhaps be a solution to the U.S. affordability housing crisis that we've all been searching for? Well, let's take a look. Now, if you're tuning into this video from a Western nation, I would imagine that community-style living probably conjures up images of like peace and love hippies and incense burning and acoustic guitars. But honestly, really, by and large, that's not the case. If you live in an area where land and construction costs are high, owning a home outright can cost too much upfront capital, and renting from a landlord can be extraordinarily expensive. Co-ops allow a group of people to come together to form their own legal entity and raise the required capital by buying one or more shares of their legal entity in order to access levels of financing that they wouldn't have been able to ordinarily do on their own. This group can be as little as 3 people, or 10 people, up to 100 people, depending on the size and scope of the housing they aim to purchase or construct themselves. By paying up, they acquire membership and the right to use the community's support facilities, including renting a cooperative apartment, townhouse, or other housing unit. You also likely get a dividend each year, as your shares in this co-op are usually invested in a savings institution, with an interest rate that's often higher than a commercial bank. Now, if you're watching this from the United States specifically, you're actually more familiar with this kind of setup than you probably think. You've probably heard of places like REI or Costco or Sam's Club. And by being a member in these co-ops, obviously you don't get your hiking gear or the famous rotisserie chicken for free. But by having a membership in this co-op, you do get to benefit from reduced costs on everyday items. Co-ops like this do the exact same thing, except they do it for housing. But there are important distinctions here. Unlike condominiums, these co-ops are independent organizations. They're not owned by the government or housing authorities. Members are also not renters technically. They own their homes together and pay housing charges, not rent. And also, unlike renters, members in a co-op have a say in how their housing is run. They're frequent membership meetings where you get a democratic vote on how the pooled money is spent. For example, to use the income from housing charges to purchase things like a photovoltaic system and provide free energy to those who live in the house. And because most are operated as nonprofit organizations, they operate at cost, which makes them much, much more affordable over time. There's no middleman and extraordinarily few overhead charges to pay for. They also offer security of tenure. You can stay in your home as long as the co-op meets your needs, and you follow the rules that all of the members agree to. If the co-op no longer meets your needs, you simply vacate the property and sell your stock. But what is so important to know here is that traditionally members of this co-op see themselves as a member in a community. And that is often the most important thing for them, which is also something I think is so highly undervalued in housing nowadays. So often we hear reports of people feeling more and more isolated, less connected, less heard. And what co-ops provide is a real, tangible way to work towards a common goal, in this case, affordable housing, with a group of people who are also your neighbors. Some, but not all, co-ops will require that members of the community do maybe like 20 hours a year of maintenance, taking turns gardening, or the upkeep of common areas. Others will simply use the pool of community funds to outsource those kind of services. Again, that's up to you because you're the one in control, not a landlord. But I think just like volunteering in a community setting helps to create a real sense of togetherness and a sense of pride of place, I think the same thing really happens here in co-ops too, because whether you're, helping to keep the garden clean or mowing the lawn or helping to upkeep the common areas, you're not just doing it because you have to or because a landlord says you need to, but because this is also your space and one that you share with your neighbors. It's yours, and it's something that everyone works towards in order to enjoy together. But the struggle to find affordable housing isn't unique to Germany or the United States, but a real problem faced by residents of many countries around the globe. However, as new programs are launched to tackle this housing crisis, there's a lot of misinformation about how those housing policies and how construction subsidies will ultimately help everyday citizens looking for a place to call home without breaking the bank. That's why I always use our sponsor, Ground News, because it gives me an easy and data-driven way to read the news. On Ground News, every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of political bias, factuality, and ownership of sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, this recent story on the Canadian government's plan to invest in cooperative housing was covered by 21 news agencies. And I've been using their new comparison feature to see specific differences in left and right reporting. For this story, a left-leaning outlet highlighted the program's significant investment, as well as offering the example of housing for women, children, people living with disabilities, as well as Indigenous peoples. While a right-leaning outlet insinuates that the program is really just a measure aimed to invigorate young voters and buy votes for the Liberals and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. If one side of the political spectrum is ignoring a story, the blind spot feed will let you know so you can make up your own mind about how reliable the reporting is, which is a level of transparency that I very much appreciate when I am sifting through those news stories and reports that I use to create videos here on my channel. So go ahead and check them out by heading over to ground.news/Ashton or scan the QR code on your screen. You can subscribe through my link to get 40% off the Vantage subscription, which includes unlimited access to all of their amazing features. Plus, when you subscribe, you not only support me, but you're also supporting an independent platform trying to make the news more transparent. Now, housing cooperatives aren't necessarily unique to Germany, but they are pretty popular here. Over 3 million people are members in one of the over 2,000 cooperative housing associations, or are already living in one of the 2.3 million cooperative homes. To put that number into perspective, that's more than 5% of all of the apartments, or more than 10% of all rental apartments in the country. The first homeownership housing co-op was founded in 1862 in Hamburg, but the bulk of co-op housing development has really happened since the Second World War, when Germany, as pretty much all European countries, faced a severe housing shortage. 58% of the housing cooperatives portfolio in Western Germany was developed between 1949 and 1970. The majority of this was financed through the social housing system. However, there have, of course, been more modern interpretations of housing cooperatives as well. Today, the majority of projects tend to be small, even though there are some larger ones with more than 10,000 apartments. On average, they typically comprise of around 1,200 apartments in numerous buildings throughout a city. And this can actually be quite advantageous because if you are a member of a co-op, for example, and you're living in one of these apartments and maybe you outgrow it because your family is growing, or you want to downsize because you have children who are leaving the nest. Well, as a member of this co-op, you're given priority for a new apartment that better meets your needs as part of the entire cooperative housing association. Still, when and where an apartment becomes available is uncertain. Some cooperatives have tens of thousands of members, yet just a few thousand apartments. Moreover, under the terms of the agreement, no member can be given notice, so apartments usually only become available when someone passes away or chooses to leave. And in most major cities, there's a wait list. But that usually isn't a huge deterrent because for the vast majority of people who join a co-op, that community is worth the wait. For example, here in Freiburg, where I live, there is currently a plan moving forward for a new neighborhood titled Kleine-Schultz. One of the cooperatives that wants to apply for about 70 of these apartments was specifically founded under the name ___. When asked in a formal survey as to why they specifically wanted to construct within a housing cooperative, the respondents nearly exclusively said that they wanted cooperative living because of the social range and sense of community. They also said that the most important shared design feature was not a sauna or a pool or a fancy coffee bar like most American apartment complexes. No, residents here, again, overwhelmingly said that they wanted facilities where the members of the cooperative could come together, outdoors or indoors. And beyond community, perhaps the big, most major reason why housing cooperatives are so overwhelmingly popular in Germany and maybe even specifically here in Freiburg, because it's a good example, is that housing prices just tend to be astronomical. In a recent study, the IFO Institute and the Institute of Swiss Economic Policy found that an average annual price hike of 9% can be expected over the next 10 years. For Germany, that figure is put at 7%. The German government continues to fail to meet its target of 400,000 new homes per year. In fact, just over half was missed last year. And in 2024, the target will be missed by an even greater margin, according to the Macroeconomic Business Cycle Research Institute. So yeah, co-ops are a really great option to help close that gap in affordable housing options. In Germany, on average, co-op apartments are almost 30 cents per square meter below the already comparatively low price that the housing industry achieves overall. Take Saxony as an example, where they average €5.31 per square meter, with the range extending from €4.23 in the Vogtland district in southwestern Saxony to nearly €6 per square meter in Dresden, well below the city averages for non-co-op apartments. And a lot of these same economic concerns translate over to the United States as well. In every major city except New York and Philadelphia, condo and co-op prices are significantly lower than single-family home prices. However, condos are still overwhelmingly, predominantly purchased privately, right? Like you purchase a single unit in a larger building, which requires far more upfront capital to secure that loan than just simply getting shares in a cooperative. Even if you were able to use the first-time homebuyer FHA loan, which can require as little as 3.5% down, you're still probably looking at a down payment of around $6,500 on a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo like this one in Kansas City. But by contrast, shares in a cooperative average around $1,500 in the US. Of course, this varies from location to location. And they're refundable, again, when you vacate the property. But beyond simple cost savings, what I really think co-ops are able to provide is an alternative option in multifamily housing, which is something that the US desperately needs. Multifamily construction is historically low, whether you measure that as a share of all new multifamily units, whether they're for sale or for rent, or as a share of all new housing units for sale, single family plus multifamily units. Multifamily construction built for sale accounted for only 5.4% of all multifamily starts and only 2.7% of all single family and multifamily home construction starts for the first 3 quarters of 2021. And despite the fact that American culture is still very much obsessed with the single-family home, the reality is that multifamily housing is far more suitable to shifting demographics in the American population. The share of one-person households has increased from 12% of all households in 1960 to 28% today. Owner-occupied multifamily units tend to have a disproportionate share of one-person households. Approximately 20% of all owner-occupied single-family housing is occupied by one person in that household. That share is 45% in owner-occupied multifamily housing. And yeah, I think most of us would probably think that this growth in single-family households would provide a more robust argument for the production of multifamily housing units, right? Like if you're a single person living in a house, you probably don't need a 3-bedroom single-family home. An apartment or a condominium or a co-op would be much more appropriate for your needs. But quite frankly, that's not what we've seen in the construction industry. Unfortunately, U.S. condominium production has been low primarily because of financing constraints for both the sponsor and the builder. Successful condo development requires that the sponsor be able to sell the units quickly, which requires that the potential unit buyers either have cash on hand or can obtain financing. Few owner-occupants, especially in more affordable buildings, will be able to purchase with cash. And with credit tight for first-time home buyers, this uncertainty is a concern for sponsors. But co-ops solve that problem because you already have a group of people who have pooled their collective assets in order to either acquire that building or construct it outright. So if co-ops are this wonderful solution to the U.S. affordable housing crisis, why don't we build more of them? Well, unfortunately, a lot of this just simply boils down to the fact that multi-housing units are often seen as un-American. The cultural hold that the middle-class dream of the white picket fence is an obvious fixture in the collective imagination of most Americans. Because in the U.S., the concept of home is much more than just mere shelter. We're told that home is where the heart is. It's a mythical place where the nuclear family gathers during culturally significant occasions to make memories that bind us. And when you look at most Americans' investment portfolios, home equity specifically has been the primary builder of the middle-class wealth for generations. The home is so deeply rooted in our concepts of marriage and family, it's really seen as inseparable from them. But this dream has become more and more of a nightmare for younger generations. Outside of the fact that home ownership chains you to the hyperinflationary, financialized economy, the so-called ownership society has also meant that we are now a perpetually indebted society. In 1984, the median annual income for an American household stood at $22,420, and the median house sale price for the first quarter of that year came out at $78,200. So the house sale price to income ratio stood at 3.49. Today, the median house prices are now nearly 6 times the median household income in America. As the forces driving housing inflation are largely profit-driven, an increase in the supply of cooperative housing can democratize affordability. In the United States, we really do sort of expect that housing issues and upkeep and maintenance, these are things that are tackled either by a landlord or by the housing authority. And living in a cooperative means that you really have to reconceptualize your role as a tenant. But the other reason why co-ops maybe just aren't so popular is that nearly all forms of multifamily housing, including co-ops, have a land availability issue. Although we would like to see larger community-led schemes develop, the reality is it isn't always that easy with the way that our land is zoned. Finding pockets of usable land to develop them can be difficult, again because single-family zoning and other planning restrictions can make this impossible. You know, even though housing cooperatives are typically very well connected, very well designed, have a great sense of community, and quite frankly are very well maintained, they're typically lumped into the same basket of high-density housing. and the pearl-clutching horror of existing property owners. Housing, especially in wealthy areas, is a premium and a protected asset that HOAs and NIMBY advocates are ready to go to war for. And at the end of the day, co-op housing isn't for everyone, but the model is an important option for people who value a community-centric approach or are looking for something more affordable. Co-ops are an important component of the housing continuum, and we need to build a lot more of them. So let me know what you think. Do you think co-ops could work in the United States? Do you think they could be a great option to help with the US affordability housing crisis? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Yeah, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Tschüss!